Hi, everyone. To give a brief introduction, the name's Nat. I'm head of community at the organization Exceptional Individuals. In short, we're a social enterprise. And with the revenue, we then give it back to the community and support people with job support, coaching, mentoring. It's a nice little social mission that's self-contained. Another little gem for you is that 80% of our organization is neurodivergent. We're experts via experience, as well as qualified professionals, hopefully. I'm currently doing my master's in neuroscience. We like to combine that lived experience and theoretical practice. Myself, I'm dyslexic, dyspraxic, autistic, OCD, but I'm just bragging now. I've got plenty of diversity to share with you. So neurodiversity is a kind of umbrella term that essentially means neuro, as in brain, diversity, are all different. So every single person, neurodiverse. Now, neurodiverse just means diversity of thought. Now, that is what we're going to be looking at today. That's dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, all of those. So if you think substantially different from the majority of the population, that's when you'd be neurodivergent. Everyone thinks different. Some people think a little bit more different. That's kind of the foundation. You may have guessed by the accent, I'm from the UK. Today, we're mainly going to be focused on dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, and ADHD, but that's not where it stops. Neurodivergence, many things come under it. My definition is any way of thinking which isn't inherently a disability, but is disabling by society. I would say in an ideal world, having autism, amazing, what a gift. In the world we live in, it can be disabling. That's kind of the parameters I'm using, which is different from mental health. We are going to be tapping into a little bit more of that later on. Now, here's our lovely team. Today, you've got myself. You've also got Danny, who's the CEO. We are looking at neurodiversity in talent management, a new perspective for the people's team. Sounds like a fancy title. Basically, we're just looking about recruitment and how we might support our ND colleagues and future colleagues. To give a heads up, as I said, this was designed today by neurodivergent people in mind for recruiters to help you best gauge neurominorities. Neurominorities, neurodivergent, neurodiverse, they're all used interchangeably. They do have slightly different meanings, but I will mostly be using them interchangeably today, just so we're all aware. If successful, what we're going to be learning is we're going to be having like grow schools, prevent bias, protect you and your company, to improve your understanding, to help support future candidates, but it should be good. My first question to all of you is, what do you want to know about neurodiversity? Now, this honestly could be anything. It could be around recruitment, around management, around yourself. It could be around children. I just want to know what you're interested in. All right, nice. How can we set candidates up for success in an interview? Brilliant. I'm pleased to say I am covering that today. We're on the right page already. Supporting career development. What is included when people say on the spectrum? That is a good question. I might actually answer that one now, just to get it over the way with. All right, autism, big old subject. Autism isn't a diagnosis, okay? I know, shock, what's that? Originally, there was different types. We had classic autism, we had Asperger's, we had functioning levels. It wasn't really, it was confusing because some people had some had another. It just didn't represent the spectrum. Essentially, every single person who has the characteristics of autism is an individual, and no single person is the same. So they came up with a new diagnosis, ASD, autism spectrum disorder. And this is essentially saying, while there are some overlapping characteristics, every single person is unique and different. That's where the old expression comes from. If you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. The spectrum is just saying there is a wide variety. If you were to, I have autism, it's going to be very different from someone in your team who has autism. That's why it's not really that helpful to understand labels. It's more helpful to understand characteristics and kind of personal interactions. Hopefully that understands it. What's the biggest challenges or barriers neurodivergent employees often face in the workplace? Yep, we'll be looking at that. And how to lead conversation when candidates are neurodivergent. Okay, we're all in the right place today. That is good. Some common questions that I bet you're going to ask at some point or the other, which I hope to cover, is, do I need evidence to make adjustments? Spoiler, no. Again, bit of a spoiler. No, you will not know. What adjustments might be required? We'll be talking about that. What are some common challenges? And how can we encourage people to be open? Now, the bottom one is a bit of a loaded question because obviously, as a talent team, you want people to be open, but you have to understand it from the other side and know why someone may not want to disclose. The first section, we're going to be looking at language, some terminology. We're going to look at some statistics, just so everyone knows how prevalent ND is, and also some strengths and challenges. Because when we look at neurodivergence, a lot of people think it's this rebranding of disability and deficit, where it is not. Deficit and disability is talking about what someone is lacking, what they aren't able, where neurodivergence is talking about the fluctuation of human ability. It's appreciating that there's elements of us which far exceed the average person, and there are also equally parts which are more challenging and more difficult. It's appreciating that we are spiky. That's the key difference. One is seeing us as three-dimensional human beings. The other one is pinpointing an area where we fall short compared to the majority. This is why ND is the term to go with. Now, I want you to put a little pin on whichever one you feel you have the most experience with. Maybe it's dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD. And while you're doing that, I'm going to give you a quick, in a nutshell, definition. Kicking things off, dyslexia. In a nutshell, dyslexia is about phonologics, how the brain kind of interprets written information. It might be that what you see on the paper isn't how your brain interprets it. Think of it not having the information, seeing the information, and how the brain interprets the information. Then we've got dyspraxia. Now, not many people have heard of dyspraxia, which is kind of interesting considering it's just as prevalent as dyslexia. Where dyslexia is about reading, dyspraxia is more about motor coordination and communication. Think of it like having the information in your head, but being a traffic jam and it kind of like filtering out a bit slower. This is why it can affect movement as well as speech. It's just having your brain overthinking and struggling to kind of get things out in the right order. Then we've got autism. Autism is a massive category, as I mentioned. Autism is how the brain processes information, a completely different way of thinking. It can also affect sensory information. You might be hypersensitive, you might find certain situations more uncomfortable, whereas on the flip side, there'll be other areas which you find more natural than your peers. Then we've got ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Now, the reason I put this cheeky little neurodivergence in brackets is that not all individuals with ADHD experience hyperactivity. That's the common one that people get wrong. A thing that you may not know, that if you are female, the chances of you having the hyperactive tendency is a lot less. When you think of ADHD, you're probably thinking of a young boy who's jumping up and down, where actually ADHD can demonstrate itself in many different ways. You can be introverted, you can be passive, but you can still get diagnosed with ADHD. Those are the ones that you're most likely to come into contact with. Is it because there's more people like them? Maybe, maybe not. But more realistically, it's because people are more likely diagnosed with them, whereas the others less so. Things like dyscalculia is very similar to dyslexia, but it's kind of dyslexia of the maths world. Doesn't mean you're bad at maths. It means that despite in theory knowing the equations, knowing the math behind it, you still might end up with the wrong answer. It can also affect you with distances and the passing of time, kind of struggling to calculate those areas. Then you've got dysgraphia, which is, again, similar to dyslexia, but its own diagnosis. And this mainly revolves around writing. If you are perfectly normal or above intelligence, but your writing just doesn't correlate, or maybe the way you hold pens is a bit awkward, that is a classic sign of dysgraphia. Now, none of these affect intelligence, okay? And that's a really important thing to know. These ones, nice and simple, clear-cut neurodivergence. But then you have ones obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, or Tourette's syndrome. And now these are ones that potentially could also be mental health. You'll realize that neurodivergence and mental health, while are separate things, are closely interlocked. That sometimes, depending on the situation or the individual, it's hard to kind of say one is one is the other. Hopefully everyone's all okay on those definitions, but if you want any more information, just let me know and I'll happily explain it further. Now, which of these terms do you use? I kind of spoiled it earlier, but let me know. Do you use neurodivergent? Do you use neurodifferent? Or do you use neurominority? Or maybe you don't use any of them. All these terms very much are interchangeable. You can't really go too wrong on them. Neurodivergent is the one that most people use. More inclusive, though, is neurodiverse. Now, bear in mind, inclusivity doesn't mean better. It just means the amount of people that it's involving. For instance, if you are talking about people with autism dyslexia, neurodiverse, which is more people, but neurodivergent is probably more accurate. Neurodifferent, not really used, to be honest. Neurominority, some people use it, some people prefer it. I think that's a personal choice. I would say if someone says they are XYZ, you would just use whatever they said. But if you're just talking generally, you can't really go far wrong with that one. Now let's go to some fun stats to make sure that what we're doing today is actually relevant. How many people do you think are neurodiverse? When we're looking at the global population, how many people think substantially different to the majority of the population? Now, of course, these numbers vary depending who you ask and where you get your information from. However, from a Western perspective, these numbers are pretty robust. It is 15%. 15% of the population is neurodivergent. That is a huge minority. This is a lot. And this is one of the reasons why this today is important, because we are missing out on a massive talent pool if we're not taking into consideration these differences. I spoke about how being neurodivergent means you have fluctuation of ability. Let's put it to the test. Now, someone who is neurotypical, someone who has a quite typical neurology, I would call them more of a generalist. Of course, there's things they're better and they're worse at, but more often you'll find they're quite balanced in their skill set. Where a neurodivergent person, I like to describe them as a specialist. While there may be areas that they may struggle in, there'll be areas that they far exceed in. And when you're trying to find the right person for the right role, this is what we got to look at. If someone is really struggling, what other area might they succeed in? As a team, we're lacking in creativity and innovation, to be honest, but luckily you're here today. I'll sort you out there. But when it comes to communication, this is the team to be in. So as you can see, maybe when you're hiring in your own team, you might think, okay, well, maybe we should, if someone might not have the best communication skills, but they're very creative when it comes to coming up with ideas, that might be the type of individual we're looking for. We tend to hire people who kind of reflect our own skill set because we'll get along with them. But actually, we should be looking at the person who'd be right for that position. Let's look at some prevalence. All that means is the likelihood. So what I want you to do is rank these in terms of how common do you think they are. Some of these I've already given away, but I haven't given away the exact numbers. So for instance, if you think autism is the most prevalent, you'd rank it as a number 1. If you think dyslexia is the least, you'd rank it as 6. Dyslexia's got the top spot at the moment. Dyslexia, yep, I can say dyslexia is the most prevalent. And we're looking at about 10% with dyslexia, quite high. ADHD, now that is about 5%, I think. I mean, hold me account. Again, it depends where you get your numbers from. Autism, yep, that's about right. Dyspraxia. Do you know what? I would say more or less correct. Well, let's actually see. I wrote them down so we can actually have a look. We've got dyslexia, about 5 and 10%. In the UK, that's about 6.3 million people in the UK have dyslexia. It's a decent amount. Dysgraphia, which is the writing. Now, it's important to know a lot of people who have dysgraphia get diagnosed with dyslexia because people get confused. You might not hear that one as much, but it's still worth knowing. Dyspraxia is about 5%. Again, very similar to dyslexia, but less well known. ADHD, about, I said about 7, but they're saying about 2.5 to 5%. Again, these are just the stats. Realistically, they're probably higher. Dysgra, we got 5% for dyscalculia. And autism, 1%. Might not sound a lot, but when you think of how many people you work with, that's a high percentage. And Tourette's, about 1%. This is definitely something we should take serious. Now, while we've talked about individual conditions, really we should be talking about individual people. Because, for instance, it's very common to have an intellectual disability as well. But really want to make this clear. The people who you're working with and hiring very likely do not. but just know that the likelihood increases. Also, the likelihood of having anxiety dramatically increases if you're neurodivergent. If you're neurodiverse, unfortunately, the likelihood of getting depression is a lot higher, as well as multiple sclerosis. I mean, I'm not saying that everyone with dyslexia is going to get multiple sclerosis, but what I am saying, the likelihood of having additional things, co-occurrence, goes up dramatically. So if someone was to disclose to you that they have XYZ, while they may not necessarily tell you any additional information, you should definitely still think it's a possibility. And also brain injury. Now, I really don't want to confuse anyone today, but you get neurodevelopmental neurodivergence and you get acquired neurodivergence. So it is possible to have a lot of the characteristics through physical accidents. However, that's a very, very small percentage compared to the vast majority which are from birth and are with you your entire life. Okay, what are some quick advantages of hiring a neurodivergent person? Diverse perspectives, creativities, innovation, capacity to focus, problem solving, brilliant. Select set skills. Now, what I always say to people, right? Who wouldn't want all of these lovely skills, right? As someone who's hiring someone, of course I want a diverse perspective. Of course I want creativity. Innovation, sign me up. But these strengths do not come for free. You have to be able to create the right foundations and the right environment in order to unlock these benefits that come with neurodiverse people. And this is why when you're making these adjustments, while they may cost money, while they might take a little bit longer, you do kind of reap what you sow, and these skill sets do come out. Like, they do not come for free. Do know that these things we want, this is why you're making these adjustments. Quick check-in. All right, everyone likes it. That's great. If you didn't understand, I would still carry on anyway. I'm glad everyone says it's good. So now let's talk about disclosure. To disclose or not disclose, that is the question. It's something which a lot of people ask me. I would love to say absolutely. Unfortunately, I can't at the moment, and I'll explain a bit more. We've got being inclusive, having those tough conversations. Do we need evidence? First of all, if you were neurodivergent, maybe you are, would you disclose? Honestly, and again, I don't want what answer you think I want. I just want an honest answer. Oh dear, that's not looking great, is it? And to be honest, can you blame you? Why? Discrimination, judgment, stigma, all these things are real. They're not imaginary. Now, the benefits of disclosure, hopefully I don't need to tell you, better understanding, more support, more understanding. All these areas are tenfold, but it's a bit of a gamble. Here is a random quote of someone who says, "I don't want to be seen making excuses or needing special treatment. I just wanted to be treated the same as everyone else." This is one of the common reasons why people may not disclose. They might be completely fine, but it's later down the line where they might have challenges. And by that point, the process to get the support is lengthy, it's clunky, and this ideally, the sooner the better. So what are some things we can do to be an ND, neurodivergent, friendly employer? If we know that currently people aren't disclosing, but we know that statistically, there's a lot of us out there. All right, we've got be consistent with messaging and practices. Absolutely. Well, that's a real big problem we've got in the UK at the moment. People really high up will say, yep, we're inclusive, we are committed to diversity, but people down the food chain have no idea what's going on. There's that consistency. We've got asking early on, and not just asking once, asking twice, asking at the onboarding process, asking someone when they've been in an organization for a while. We know people don't feel comfortable talking about it early on. Ask them again later, but don't ask them to directly. Give them the space for them to disclose. Protect information once disclosed. Yeah, I did a session today for neurodiverse people on disclosing, and one of their biggest fears was around the security and how safe that information is. Who's getting told? Guidelines, ERG groups, yep, we are working on it. We are working on it. Training, educating people, training on resources, outwardly share examples. Yep, all of these are definitely things we're able to do. We just got to do it. And this is where it comes to how feasible something is. And if it's not feasible, it's fine. I'm not looking for the perfect answer. I just want the real answer. We've got the application stage. We can ask about adjustments. Yeah, I don't see any reason why we can't do that. Then we got present neurodiversity friendly assessment materials. Now, as you can see, these are starting to go down, and that's completely fine. When we look at reasonable adjustments, not everything is reasonable depending on the circumstances. But the most important thing is that you question it. If we're not doing it, why aren't we doing it? Is there a barrier in the way? Is this something we can find a workaround? As long as you have explored the options, that's the most important thing, rather than doing something just because you've already done it. Okay, we've got state in the material that you welcome neurodiverse talent. Brilliant. Most people would agree that in some shape or form, these things that would make a huge difference are all possible. Next question. What is most important thing when having a conversation around neurodivergence? You're sat with someone, you're talking about it. Do you think being approachable is most important? Maybe understanding, supportive, positive, or flexible? Now, obviously, all of these are important. But if you notice, they're all kind of very soft skills. It's about being approachable. Do you feel someone could talk to you and have someone to listen to? Understanding? Do you have at least basic understanding of neurodivergence to kind of understand it and to show some support? Supportive? Not only are you willing to listen, you're willing to do something. Positive? Rather than saying, oh dear, dyslexia, my God, are you okay? You're being a bit more positive. Oh, that's great. That's interesting. How does it affect you? I'd love to know a bit more. And flexible, because everyone's different. Rather than just saying, all right, you're dyslexic. Let's look at the dyslexic guidebook. You see the person as an individual. Okay, really brilliant. Now here's some true and false questions to get your brain thinking. True or false? I can ask a candidate whether they have a disability. I can ask questions to know if adjustments are needed. A diagnosis is required for adjustment. Okay, let's see. False, true, false. I can ask a candidate whether they have a disability. No, you cannot. It counts as discrimination. What you can do is create a space where they can disclose should they feel comfortable, and you can give them the space to do so. So you can't go out like, hey, are you autistic? Because for all I know, you have negative ideas of autism and you're already judging me. So don't be doing that. I can ask questions to know if adjustments are needed. Absolutely. Because adjustments aren't just for people with registered disabilities. Adjustments are for everyone. And a diagnosis is required for an adjustment. Absolutely not. Any organization which asks for proof, I would say it's not a good organization. Why? Well, we've already talked about it. If we're only giving support for people who have official diagnosis, we're only giving support to white men. What about everyone else who's not diagnosed? You have to be able to open it up to self-diagnosis. Otherwise, we're not really giving the support to the people who would benefit most from it. Great answers all. Now, which of these sentences do you think is the best one to ask? So the potential options are, do you have a medical condition that means you may need adjustments during the recruitment process? Is that the best option? Is there anything I can do to support you right now during our conversation? Is that the best answer? Or is there any support, resources, or adjustments you need to be able to be your best during the recruitment process? Okay, with some of these, you may argue there's not a right answer, but it's good to see kind of where we all are. The one that you have picked as the most votes is the last one. Ooh. Is there any support, resources, or adjustments you need to be at your best during the recruitment process? Why I like this answer is it's not mentioning disability, it's not mentioning differences, it's essentially saying, what can I do to support you? Whereas the first one, do you have a medical condition? That's getting a little bit personal. Probably best avoid that. The second one, is there anything I can do to support you right now or during the conversation? It's a little bit vague. And if you say support, resources, or adjustments, it starts getting those ideas in people's heads of what they've had before. So this one is vague enough that it doesn't offend someone, but direct enough that it can get the ideas flowing. Now let's look at some reasonable adjustments. Reasonable is a key word here. If it puts the organization at a significant disadvantage or impacts safety, not reasonable, and you can decline it. If it is something which doesn't affect the job, doesn't put anyone in any jeopardy, and would benefit someone, absolutely reasonable. So what you might want to do is maybe you could do adjustments in the interview practice when you're giving presentations, group work, skills assessment. There are many different things which would count as an adjustment. Some of it can be technology, some of it can just be kind of mindset. let's spend a little bit and look at some of the adjustments. So on these, I want you to tell me if these are reasonable or not reasonable. And again, there isn't a universal answer. It depends on your division in your organization, in your country. It's okay to say they're not reasonable. It's more about questioning it. We've got providing areas to be explored in advance. So maybe at an interview, could you give them questions in advance rather than during? That could really benefit someone who has dyspraxia, who struggles with on-the-moment processing. Is there a reason why you're not doing that? Being flexible with lighting and temp in the interview room. People with autism can be very sensitive to these temperatures, and if things are a little bit off, this could make them feel dizzy, and it can make them very difficult to get the head out of like their foggy place. That being said, some areas you don't have that control, but you can, if you tell the person in advance that unfortunately this isn't doable, then at least they can mentally prepare. Encourage candidates to use notes to structure their responses in an interview. Is it okay for someone to come prepared? If not okay, can you justify the reason why it's not okay? And the last one, provide time notifications for timekeeping. For a lot of people with dyslexia, remember we talked about dyscalculia, time blindness, where you struggle to perceive the passing of time. You might think it's been a minute, but actually it's been 5 minutes, is a very common thing for dyslexia and also ADHD. So by giving someone that little nudge, is it okay? And I can see most of you said, yep, absolutely reasonable. Okay, now, a few of you said maybe that's not okay. And like I said, it's fine to say it's not reasonable, as long as you can justify why it's not reasonable to that position that they are applying for, rather than just universally. Now, in terms of assessments, these are really important. Now, in the UK, we have a grant, a workplace needs assessment, whether or not there's grants available, or whether you do it in-house, or whether there's a occupational therapist. Essentially, it is something which should be open to anyone, where you get to sit down with a professional and you have an honest conversation. You do not have to have a diagnosis in order to have a workplace needs assessment, but they're very important for neurodivergent people. Some of you might be very familiar with them. If you've got a bad back, you might have an assessment to make sure you get the right thing. You get like an ergonomic keyboard for your mouse. But neurodiverse people tend not to get them, even though they have a protected characteristic in most countries. What I would suggest is where most people end up having these assessments is when they're already struggling in the workplace. But the best time to get it is at the very beginning, before they're struggling. So if if problems occur along the way, you have a nice roadmap in order to get the support you require. Is it easy and accessible for someone to request one of these, or do they have to essentially go on a bit of a mission? Is the information accessible? My final thoughts before I open it up to questions is appreciate a candidate's indie strengths and what they can bring to a team. Rather than always thinking about the adjustments that you're going to have to make, think of the benefits that you can get if you were to be accessible to them. Having that change in mindset can be a massive game changer. You've got understanding that the candidate supports needs, so finding out from them. See it as a 50-50 approach. Your job isn't to be an expert. It's to at least have a basic understanding of what neurodivergence is, the type of support which is most commonly beneficial, whereas the individual should at least be able to explain how their brain works to a certain level. Never expect either party to be an expert. Quite often what happens is you are slapped with a diagnosis at an early age and said, have a good life. No one really explains it to you. Do not be surprised if the individual isn't able to explain it either. And also get familiar with reasonable adjustments. Adjustments should be tailored to the individual. Every single person will have different adjustments. But if you get familiar with the ones that have been helpful in the past, it can at least give you a kind of a good starting point to explore with the individual. And before I finish off, I just want to quickly end with, if any of you thought today was useful and you want to learn more, do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just go Exceptional Individuals on YouTube. We have things on like the science of dyslexia, the history of autism. This is a really good place to deep dive on really niche subjects, just for those who have a particular interest. We also have a LinkedIn community, which you're very welcome to join, where we talk about ND subjects, and that's on, click the link again. Other things, and I will be sending you this information as well. We also have online characteristic quizzes, which I encourage you all to give a try. While these aren't clinical and they're not official by any means, what they can do is teach you about the characteristics that are attributed to each condition. So for instance, you could do the autism test and it can give you an idea about some of the characteristics you might expect from someone. If someone tells you they have autism, what does that mean? Well, this can help break it down in terms of what exactly is included when practitioners are looking into these individuals. But yeah, please don't take this as complete science, but it's a really good place to help empathy and to gain understanding. And if you want any further information, you're always welcome to reach out to me. I'm Nat, N-A-T, at exceptionalindividuals.com, and I'm more than happy to talk to you. But email's always a good start. All right, well, thank you everyone so much, and I really hope you enjoyed it and got some gems out of it. All right, bye everyone. Have a great rest of your day.